Hello everybody and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf and to another recent reads on Sunday. My kind of semi-regular video in which I discuss the books that I've finished or am currently reading. So the books that I finished, the first one I'm not gonna say much. It's Harriet Wilson, Our Nick, published Sketches from the Life of a Free Black. Published in 1859, and this was my July pick for the classic. You'll remember that if you follow my channel, the list of 12 classics that I'm going to read in 2023, and this was the July pick. I already filmed and uploaded a review video, so if you're interested to hear more about this novel about a black girl in the beginning of the 19th century in the North just before the Civil War, check out the review video. The next book I finished was a science fiction buddy read with Heidi from my reading life, and that is The Terraformers by Annalee Newitz, which was published earlier this year. Yes, earlier this year. And we bought this book together. I mean, she bought one, I bought one when Heidi and her husband visited Amsterdam in May. And then we decided, of course, to buddy read it as well. Annalee Newitz is an author, sci-fi author, but I also read a nonfiction book written by her about lost cities, which I really, really liked. I read her, I think it was her first sci-fi, Autonomous. So this one spoiler alert, it did not quite 100% work for me as a novel. The book is split into 3 parts. We are way in the future, like 50,000 years from now. And those 3 parts are interconnected novellas, I would say. They are not featuring the same main characters, but there is reference to the characters that you encountered in the novella before. The time lapse is always a couple of 100 years in between those 3 novellas, and so the ones before were kind of ancestors, if you will. It is an ongoing story. The premise is that all the way in the future, we are terraforming planets, and you have people like in the first novella, Destry is her name, who are, what is she called? She's part of an environmental rescue team. So she takes care of the planet and takes care that terraforming is done right. The world and the terraforming project are ruled by corporations. We don't see anything of a government. It's just corporate interests. The ideas behind it, I really enjoyed, and I loved the first novella about Destry and her team and what happens when they discover an unknown life form. There are a variety of life forms in the books: humans, enhanced humans, animals, creatures that we would call animals, but who have been also evolving or enhanced so they can communicate, even not through speech but through text. So there is a moose with whom Destry partners. I loved all these ideas, and the idea of the corporate evil and what that means, and what does it mean to be an intelligent life form, a sapiens. So you have the Homo sapiens, but you also have other sapiens. I thought that was fascinating and interesting, and friendship and is explored, but also relationships, sexuality. That is all fantastic. And Destry and her team encounter difficulties with the corporation, but also with this new life form that they encounter. That really worked well for me. And I don't have an issue with interconnected novellas or short stories, but my issue was that the second and third novella, the plot just did not quite engage me. I thought it was the ideas behind it and the topics discussed for me were better than the story and the plot. So except for the first one, where I loved the plot and the main characters, the second and the third novella, I really liked the characters, I liked the ideas, but the story was kind of meh. So overall, it just did not 100% work for me, but have a look. I mean, I know people who really love this one, so it's not that I couldn't recommend it, but beware of the fact that it's interconnected novellas, and that it's, except for the first one, maybe not as plot heavy as you'd expect from a sci-fi book. But still, I mean, I enjoyed reading it, and I'm certainly enjoyed reading it with Heidi, because that's always fantastic. The next book is one of my 1001 books by women that I want to read before I die list, a non-fiction book by a Singaporean author. That's it, yeah, Cho Wai-yong, The Kingdom of Women. This was written in English, so there is no translator. Cho Wai-yong she's in her mid-40s now, something I would say. And this book was published in 2020. So Cho Wai-yong was a corporate lawyer in Singapore, and she decided to quit her job and travel to China, to mainland China, and explore her ancestry. And in the far eastern foothills of the Himalayan range in China, she comes across a tribe, the Musuo tribe, that are matrilineal and matriarchal. They live the way they have lived, that's not true. They organize their society as they have organized their society for centuries. They don't live like they've lived centuries ago. They still do farming and live off animals, but they do have internet and telephone and cars. So it's not that they stayed in the, 17th, 18th century. She visits this tribe first, and then decides to build a house there and spend half of her time in that community, and she is integrated into the community. She becomes the godmother of a lot of the younger people. She helps young people, teenagers, with education and things like that. And she tells us, this is a memoir, I should have said that right from the start, and she tells us about her life in that community, but also about the community. And we learn about the history of this community, and it's organized in themes, topics, like she talks about the men, she talks about marriage. They don't have what we would call a marriage. Men don't live in the family of their spouse. So she also has a chapter about more the religious background. It's a thin little book, and I definitely enjoyed it. It also has pictures of here's our author in this one. Can you see how it's glaring? I'm sorry. And the traditional, there's a feast, and there's the women wearing traditional clothes. So I thought it was really interesting to learn about this tribe, this society, Musoa. I had never heard of it. That's not entirely true, because I bought this book because I learned about this tribe in another book that I read, and I thought that sounds fascinating, and I saw this book was referenced, so I bought it. But before that, I had never heard of this tribe ever. So that part was interesting. What I had issues with, in a way, is that the author presents this society as the almost utopian society where everything is fantastic. And I mean, the women definitely have more rights, way more rights than they have in other societies, and it's matrilineal and all, but it's still a society where you have strict rules about what your position is according to your sex or your gender. So for me, the solution to patriarchy, and if you follow my channel, you know that I am quite a fervent feminist against patriarchy, but the solution for me is not to have a similar society, but women rule. That's not a solution for me, because it still has these very strict rules about what you can do. When you are a man, you can't own property in this society. So it was interesting to read about that tribe, and there's a lot to learn and to love. But I would have appreciated a little bit of a critical note in terms of, is this really a solution or an alternative to our patriarchal society? But still, if you have never heard of this tribe, if you're interested in a matrilineal, matriarchal tribe in China, certainly worth your time. The next book I finished was also sci-fi. It was also nonfiction, and it's also on the 1001 list, and that is Elise Lunen, On Our Best Behavior: The Price Women Pay to Be Good. This book was published earlier this year, and it explores the way that women are supposed to behave on our best behavior, and the author does that as an organizing principle. She uses the deadly sins, so sloth and pride and anger, and why women, for instance, are not allowed to be lazy, or why women shouldn't have pride, why women shouldn't be ambitious and strive for earning money, like greed. That was all very interesting. I had trepidations about this book even before I bought it. I had question marks whether I want to buy it, because Elise Lunen she's now a freelance. I think she's now working freelance. She was the host of Pulling the Thread. I had not heard of that, but I knew her name from Gwyneth Paltrow's thing, Goop, or whatever it's called. And I'm not in favor of that. That's way too woo-woo for me and new agey. And there's a couple of things in this book about women talking to the dead and spirits, and that's just not my thing at all. So it was not 100% a success, and I knew that going in because I knew where the author came from. But still, her exploration of behavior that we expect from women was definitely worth my while, even though I'm not a fan of Gwyneth Paltrow, and I'm certainly not a fan of Goop or the woohoo stuff with, talking to the spirits and things like that. So it's a recommendation with kind of a trigger warning, if you will, that be aware, just Google Goop and Elise Lunen and you will know what I mean. But the way she was telling us about, it's a pretty feminist approach to all that. And I appreciated that. And I appreciated the exploration in terms of this, very deep-rooted system of moral guidance with the deadly sin. So that was worth it. And the rest, when she was interviewing women who talk with the dead, I just skipped that part. Anyway, so those are the four books that I finished. And what am I currently reading? I'm currently reading 3 buddy reads. I'm still struggling with getting my reading going, but it's almost August, and as you know, August will be 30 books in 30-day month. So I hope that this will definitely get me back into my own reading and not depending on buddy reads for me to pick up a book. But I know that it always happens in the summer when I have finally, kind of not vacation time, but work slows down, but then the heat comes on, and yeah. So it's nothing that worries me. Anyway, the first buddy read is with Heidi from our reading life, whom I already mentioned, and we are now reading the Seventh Lindley by Elizabeth George, Playing for the Ashes, that was published in the mid-1990s. This was another book that she bought in Amsterdam in my favorite used bookstore there. I had already bought it, so we are making our way through all the books that she bought in Amsterdam. We already read together Lady Susan, which was another one that she bought. Anyway, so this is the seventh. You're probably familiar with the series. It revolves around Inspector Thomas Lindley, who is an aristocrat in England. In London, he works for Scotland Yard. He is a detective, and his partner is Barbara Havers. She is lower in rank, but they are teamed up and developed a real partnership over the course of the book, the series. And then you have kind of the side characters that are recurring, like Lady Helen, who is Thomas Lindley's love interest and whom I don't like, but that's another story. And then there is, of course, a crime, a murder in each book. And this time, a famous cricket player is murdered by arson. We never had arson before, and Lindley and Havers investigate. This book is different than the others in the series, as it has chapters that are told by a woman named Olivia, who is connected to people around the crime. We learn how, but that normally Elizabeth George doesn't do that. It works really well for me, I have to say. I definitely like it. We are about a third in, a little more, and we have another check-in today, so really enjoying this one. And then I started two books. The first one is Nora Holt's book, Farewell Happy Fields. She is an Irish author, and I'm reading this together with Kim in the context of our project that we want to read Irish female novelists. And the book was published in 1948, so she is an early 20th century, she's died, an early 20th century author. I can't say too much. I have not read that much yet. It's about Adam, a man who was just released from an insane asylum, as they called it back then, and decides to not sell his soul to the devil, but be a really bad person so that he destroys his soul. That's the premise of the book. And the other book I started is a buddy read with Adam, and that is the second book in the Earthsea cycle by Ursula Le Guin, The Tomes of Atuan. And I'm a little behind because we have a check-in on Tuesday, but I will catch up today. So the Earthsea is a series. We read the first one about this wizard called Ged. Thank you, viewer, who told me that it's Ged and not Jed. And the second one starts with a priestess, but the wizard will come in, and I'm hoping that I like this one more than the first one, because a lot of you told me that the series actually improves. So I will talk more about these last two in the next check-in. So this was my quite lengthy, keep it under 20 minutes, but quite lengthy recent reads on Sunday. Thank you very much for watching as always. And as always, I'm looking very much forward to your comments, and I'll talk to you all soon in the next one.